How do we play feature Tetris? How do we plan for maximizing our effectiveness with delivering an MBI? That's my topic for today. Hi, I'm Joshua Barnes, the founder of Process Mentors, and welcome to this mini webinar of all things Discipline Agile. So this is part of a series that I've been doing on how to start improving your value stream. And last week I covered value flow planning and something I called MBI Tetris. Today's topic is value flow planning from a feature and story perspective. So feature Tetris. So I'm going to start off by bringing up kind of where I left off with the feature Tetris. What we're trying to do is bring our MBIs, our minimum business increments, as well as our MVPs from our business backlog through this discovery workflow, which represented here on the left, the project management side, into this intake queue. And the intake queue is the holding spot for us to be able to then pull from that intake queue into the intake backlog when we're ready. So last week, taking a look at how we might do quarterly planning for arranging the work to be able to fit the most amount of value delivered based on the capacity of the teams and who would need to do that work within our value stream. That's what's represented here. So now what I want to do is I want to take one of the more complicated MBIs, one of the ones that has a little bit more size and complexity because it requires updates to multiple products. So I'm going to take this MBI, a 1.2 is just the identifier that I'd put on it. And we're going to take a look at how we can plan to execute the value-adding activities required for these enhancements to be completed. So in this example, it's an MBI requiring enhancements in 4 different products, each with a separate team. All 4 of the teams are using the Agile lifecycle, which is the iterative approach. Although whether it was the Agile lifecycle or the Lean lifecycle, the underlying governance structure, the phases, and the lightweight milestones that we have are the same. So it would have been okay if one of the teams wanted to have a different lifecycle based on their way of working. And also, I like this as an example because this was one where 3 of the teams are going to start at relatively the same point in time, but one's going to start a few months later. And again, we knew this as we were, going through and taking a look at what was in the intake queue, and again, from that type of a value flow planning perspective, who would be available, and again, how to fill up the capacity as best we could. So, moving on to taking a look at how we might see this play out across our life cycles here. So where we might do value flow planning, this feature Tetris, as I'm calling it, is at this intersection. If three of the 4 project teams are going through their inception phase, and we can kind of arrange the timing so they're going to be, similarly through inception and into the construction phase, at close to the same amount of time, we would want to try to do this value flow planning towards the end of inception. So 3 of these teams, the direct-to-consumer, in the blue, the product fulfillment in the maroon, and the ultra-premium innovations in the lavender, that's where they're at. They've explored their scope at this point. Towards the end of inception, they would have been able to get a good handle on what the ask was beyond the information contained in the MBI. So at the end of inception, we would have seen them identify stories, taken a look at what type of risk there was, what types of specifically technical risk, right? Further understanding of what types of dependencies there are, and overall have a good understanding of the work. Now, the 4th team, the inventory management team, because they're not going to start their part for a few months, what we would do in this case is we would need some pre-inception work to be done. So in this case, we had our product owner and our architecture owner exploring some of the work that they would be doing in inception. Again, they have a relatively small amount of work compared to the other 2 teams. And they would be doing this so they could participate in this planning and how we would be sequencing the work so that we could get it completed as best we could. So What we would expect to see, or hopefully see, is stories that had been identified that, based on a risk value perspective, prioritized by the product owner in our backlog or our work items pool or whatever type of a container we want to call it. We're trying to get through the initial part of construction and achieve the milestone of proven architecture, which just is the stories, whether they're user stories or technical stories, that prove out that we're on a good, solid foundation to continue to build the rest of the enhancements, the rest of the functionality and scope. But once we get past that, initial milestone, we need to be taking a look at how we can sequence the work to achieve certain outcomes. So I want to start off by taking a look at what I see oftentimes with project teams, right? So they are taking an iterative approach, and I could have drawn lines in here to show where the iterations are. But what we see here is a lot of work that was done across the construction phase. And in this case, we would see that these features met whatever the sufficient functionality was to be able to move into the transition phase, make sure we've got good production readiness, and then move on with deploying that new functionality. But why is this not desirable? So one of the things is that whether we're seeing something to maybe this extreme or something kind of close, where most of the features, the way that the backlog has been prioritized, get completed towards the end of the construction phase. Well, we're delaying getting feedback from any one of these individual features from an end-to-end perspective, right? So features being decomposed into stories, and there's typically, step by step. A customer, whether internal or external, is going to be traversing through. Well, if we're waiting to the very end of our timeline, we've delayed potentially getting some of that feedback that we could have acted on at those smaller points in time. We're also getting a delay in feedback on how a customer may interact with functionality from one feature to another feature, right? So we might have feature number one, and the customer is going to go through part of that business process, and then they're maybe going to do something that is in feature number 5, right? And so by having a delay where all of these features are essentially being completed at relatively the same point in time, which is very late in the timeline we have here, it doesn't enable us to do that more end-to-end type of feedback that we can get. And there's a lot of things, but the last thing I did want to mention here is that if there are changes needed, right, as we're seeing an entire feature and we can interact with it, right, our stakeholders, our subject matter experts can interact with it, we're going to get feedback. And if we've got stories that were completed months in advance, then it's going to be a lot less efficient for whoever did that work to go in and make updates and think through it, right? The smaller the batch and the closer the amount of time we've got from when something has been completed from an activity perspective and feedback that we need to make a change, the more efficient we can be. So those are just some of the reasons why this is not desirable. So one of the things to ensure that we don't run into that situation, as well as one that I'm going to get into that's even a bigger challenge with these more complicated MBIs, is that we can look to some of the techniques that are available. Customer journey map, right? We can take a look at how our customers are going to interact with this functionality, and why this being what I keep referring to as a complicated MBI, where we've got enhancements that need to be done in more than one product for the customer to be able to get the value in using that functionality. So back to where we're at early in construction, each one of the teams would have met that initial milestone. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look at how can we order the work. So in looking at our customer journey map, we can pull the features that are required to see the interaction of how a customer would be experiencing this. So if we take a look at the 6 features that we've got in our direct-to-consumer sales portal, and we've got 2 of them, along with one that is required in the ultra premium innovations area, right? Then if we do this, we're going to be able to get a different type of feedback, because we can go all the way through this part of the process, right? So why is this desirable? because we can do end-to-end testing and we can get end-to-end feedback. We can test and get feedback on the customer's journey via multiple features, and in this case, that are spanning multiple products. We limit the time for defects or requested changes from the interaction with that functionality, right? And being able to take advantage of actionable feedback is one of the things we're trying to get with an Agile way of working. So if I continue on with this, then we look to what else is in the MBI, and we can now pull another feature from our direct-to-consumer sales portal, and we've got 2 additional features that our product fulfillment team would need to do to be able to see this part of how a customer would be interacting with this functionality completed. So what we don't want to see is something like this, right? I mean, this is going to be a situation where we've got a feature completed very early. We've got another feature as part of this process that's going to be started later in the timeline just because of where this team is going to be able to start taking on their value-adding activities for this MBI. And then another feature that is required from our fulfillment system. This is more of a sort of the disjointed approach to planning and executing the work, where we're just looking at the individual product backlogs for each one of these products without looking at what we're trying to achieve from an MBI perspective. So continuing on, what we'd want to do instead is we would want to take a look at those features again across the multiple products and the teams and do them as close in time as we can, right? So that's part of the, although I call this Tetris, it's not really following from the top like the Tetris game, but it is trying to fill in how we're going to order this work across multiple teams to be able to achieve some of the benefits of what we can. And of course, if I just kind of go all the way on through, this would be the example of how all these features were sort of ordered across the various products and the teams doing the work. And, and this would unfold obviously more than likely slightly different in practice for any given project because, right, we've got what we're planning and then what we're faced with in actual execution. So the last thing I want to say is that this is a technique for doing some upfront planning. When we're doing our release planning, this is one of the things that I now would encourage to consider including value flow planning across a complicated MBI like this. Of course, we're looking at dependencies. We're looking at, again, different types of risks beyond what we might have mitigated by the early part of construction with that initial milestone. But it's a way to also visualize our plan and have everybody participating to be able to do this. And I don't see any questions that have come through. If there are any, I'll stay on for just another moment. And for those of you that watch this on replay, if you have any questions, please post on the LinkedIn thread. I'll do my best to continue to monitor that and provide any other clarifications, answer any questions that I can. All right. Thank you, everyone. And looks like good to see Claudia again. And Claudia is asking, you have introduced the risk variable. Could you explain that a bit, please? Yes. So Claudia, from a risk perspective, right? One of the things that we want to see teams doing when they're using Discipline Agile is from each one of the team's perspective, and I'll just pull this slide back up here for a moment, right? So taking a look at this and looking at the blue team, the direct-to-consumer sales portal team that I have here, the risk value approach in Discipline Agile is intended to have a nice bit of healthy tension and a lot of collaboration between our architecture owner role and our product owner role. So coming out of inception, what we should expect is that the way that the work items have been prioritized are based on specific things that are going to potentially be very risky or very challenging to do. Are we integrating with a new system? Are we doing something new or novel, right? Those are the things that we want to prove out. And a lot of times if we do one or one story that mitigates that risk and there's a whole bunch more, well, we don't need to do all of them. We've proven that we're able to accomplish that. It could be a very complicated business rule. It could be something that is still just a little bit unknown. So that's at the product and the single team level. The next thing we need to consider when we're moving to MBIs and we're looking to deliver the value of what's in it, in again, a complicated situation like this where we've got multiple products being enhanced and multiple teams doing that work, we need to take a look at the types of risks that we've got. And again, in the example that I used were the first two features and in blue and the one in purple, right? That's part of the customer journey. But there was also, in that case, some risk that we wanted to make sure that we were able to mitigate and get feedback on. So that's a little bit of what I would delve into with respect to risk in this particular context. All right, doesn't look like there are any other questions. So thank you all for attending today or watching on the replay, and hope to see you next week when I continue on with the next episode on our value stream management approach.